accounted for in most settings. I'm going to skip through this quickly, but this is a figure from the intercalibration paper for view traces, just going through the method. Primarily for total and dissolved aluminum, we are scavenging it, we're co-precipitating it with iron oxide. Okay, so looking through the data, I can only find about 32 papers that have dissolved polonium concentration in table form. There are probably about 50 to 60 papers that have information about polonium concentration, but many of them just provide figures, profiles, or values of polonium on particular types of particles, whether they're sediment or organisms, etc. So these stars, there are 32, represent the papers, or at least the locations where polonium has been collected in a large volume. And although it looks like the coverage is quite good, there are actually large areas, particularly the whole Middle Pacific, large areas in each of the ocean basins where there's very little coverage. The other thing I should note is that most of these papers only provide data down to about 200 or 500 meters. So there's really not that much data for dissolved polonium in the ocean, and trying to come up with an inventory is difficult when you only have a partial data for that. Tom Church and Mark Baster and I have been funded to start to try to fill in some of these gaps through the geotraces program, at least in the North Atlantic and the Pacific. Okay, so this is really bad face of the plot, because I wanted to first show you a map of the, and we know it's very small, but the dissolved polonium concentration in the surface at all of the stations that I find data for. And I'm going to put up another map so you can see, you may not be able to see this scale. 0 will be purple, blue is just under about 5, green is between 5 and 10, red is 20 ppm per 100 liters. So what you may be able to see, but you can't see any of them, which is one of the most interesting parts of that, is that the data shows that most of the surface values for dissolved polonium are between 5 and 10 ppm per 100 liters. There are some interesting areas. These blue areas are relatively low concentrations of dissolved polonium in the surface ocean. This purple, the Arabian Sea and down to the Indian Ocean also has particularly low dissolved polonium. Again, you have to put this into the context of lead, so I'm only showing the dissolved polonium, but we did look at a lead to polonium ratio to get an idea of how much of this is sorption, how much of this is a source difference. But what I've done is I've taken this data and I've tried to make slices across the different ocean basins and look for some interesting features. So this first one that I'm showing is a north-south section of the Eastern Pacific. There are about 10 stations along Western, South, and North America. The depth is down to 1,000 meters. And again, mostly we're seeing not very many features. We're seeing polonium dissolved distribution or dissolved concentration between 5 and 10 ppm per 100 meters. We do see just north of the equator, in the equator and about 20 to north, we do see a very low signal of polonium in the surface ocean. And again, this will need to be compared to lead concentration, so that's one feature. I think one of the most interesting sections I looked at was across the Atlantic. This is the old geosets data, and we essentially filled in some of the spots here through geotraces. I haven't added the geotraces data here yet. But what you see, again, is this concentration down to 1,000 meters, somewhere around 10 dpm per 100 meters, except at this tongue of high dissolved polonium at 200 meters. And this is actually something I expected to see in all of the profiles, because we assume that polonium is taken up as a biological particle on the surface. Those particles sink and get remineralized, dissolved at depth. And so we expect to see some higher dissolved polonium concentrations at about 100 or 200 meters, 100 meters below. And the only place I saw it was in this Atlantic zonal section. Here's a north-south section in the Atlantic. It's mostly sort of curved around. Again, interestingly here, the background concentration, this is only to 500 meters, is low, below 5 dpm per 100 meters, except when we get to about 20 degrees north, you get concentrations that look more like our zonal section. this section is, and this point share. And again, at this point, you see a little bit of remineralization around 200 meters, but otherwise, we don't see any changes at all. Here's the Indian meridional section, so from about 30 south to 10 north is the equator, and it's down to 1,000 meters again. And you see some evidence maybe of this remineralization, but other areas where you see low values, and actually the north, you see quite low values all the way down to 1,000 meters. And as I said, you can't see it from the cluster, but in the Gulf of the Arabian Gulf, we see very, very low values of all. I don't know if this is from absorption of high particle load or again, short term as far as that comparison. And then the last profile is here, it's actually going from Indonesia to Japan, a meridional section, down to 500 meters. And we see some areas of higher polonium at depth, near 500 meters, and again, some evidence that there may be some remineralization. This is just a really preliminary overview of the data that exists so far, and it's interesting to look for specific features. But as I said before, the data is limited to mostly the top 1,500 or even 200 meters in space. I did find, although I couldn't find the raw data, Maya Roberts did a PhD thesis with Yana Friedrich, and she did a profile using essentially the same values, deep down 100 meters, across the Southern Ocean. So this adds to our data set, and all you see are quite high values, although the scale is different, at the circumpolar front. Very briefly, some areas of the ocean where we expect to see some interesting polonium features. Oxygen minimum zones, we've already heard about iron and manganese relapse chemistry sorting out lead-210 specifically. And we do see meridional lobes of equatorial pivot, and this is the removal of polonium and lead in oxygen minimum zones, likely to do with cycling of the relapse chemistry and also microbial activity. This is data from a recent master's student who also works in Computer Lab and undergrad, looking at 100% low chlorophyll area. This is the Gulf of Alaska along line T, that's in the time period. And what we see is that in the low productivity water, we see here lead is in lead-210 profile, blue is the polonium, very little removal of polonium relative to lead. And then the last thing that you can't see, unfortunately, is a figure from Sandoval in 1995. We looked at hydrothermal vent fluid and its contribution of polonium and lead. And what you see is that in all cases, there are high bars representing the input of lead-210 from the vent fluid, and extremely low bars representing the polonium input, which was actually surprising when the data came out in the 90s, because we thought that hydrothermal vent fluid actually remained underground for a significant period of time and then was exported out into the water column. And the fact that the polonium to lead ratio is so low indicates that there's actually quite a short residence time for that fluid within the rock before it comes out of the ocean. I could also show that the hydrothermal vents, Dave Haddo's done a lot of work showing that the particles in the vent fluids have in full polonium and lead activity effect. Okay, and then this is a figure from Kim 2001, which is right over here. This is a number of profiles of the polonium efficiency in the upper ocean relative to lead. So the zero line indicates polonium and lead in equilibrium, and data to the right of that line indicates production of polonium. Polonium has been removed by stagnation. And what Kim found, sort of paradoxically, was that parts of the ocean, oligotrophic means low productivity parts of the ocean, and eutrophic are high activity parts of the ocean. And what he saw was that generally in these low productivity areas where we assume there's not much biological activity, not many particles, we're seeing higher removal of polonium than in the high production areas of the ocean. And this is one of the big paradoxes, I think, moving forward. Many people have tried to explain, some people thought that maybe it was a methodological problem, that we were somehow missing some of the polonium in our processing. Kim argued in a paper that it was the uptake of polonium onto organisms and an effective trophic transfer without remineralization and then organisms swimming away. There are a lot of questions about why this pattern exists. One thing I should say is that despite this pattern, you need to multiply these deficits by a carbon to polonium ratio to get a carbon export. And so these numbers only represent a polonium flux, not necessarily a carbon flux. So what you would expect to see here is that the carbon to polonium ratio would actually be quite low here and higher over here. Because in eutrophic areas, we know in the past and sediment data that more organic carbon is being exported in the eutrophic areas than in the lithophic areas. Okay, so I'm going to rush through some lab data, but why should you study polonium as a POC or particular organic carbon baser? Traditionally, at the time when I started my PhD, almost all oceanographic cruises were measuring carbon export using thorium-234, which is a particle reactive, naturally nuclide, with a shorter half-life than polonium. But it doesn't mean that there's much mechanistic explanation why thorium betrays carbon, and yet there's more to show that polonium makes more sense. So that's what I'm going to show on the next few slides. So as we know, polonium is found everywhere. It's got a half-life of 138 days. This gives us some information about processes that happen on the order of seasons. It has a high particle reactivity, but particularly has a high affinity for organic matter and specifically protein. And one of the questions I think we need to answer moving forward is polonium acting like a sulfur analog? Tom Church shows the group 6 element. Is it replacing sulfur with a protein, or is it a sulfur-seeking metal like mercury or cadmium that's binding to the disulfur bridges and proteins? There's a very high correlation between polonium and biological activity. Those studies show that the removal of polonium is highly correlated with chlorophyll, and I showed in my lab work that there's very predictable uptake of cycling in the plankton. People here were interested in ghosts. Marine organisms get exposed to a huge amount of high-energy aggregation from polonium that bioaccumulates within them, and we are still sort of trying to understand the implications of that. And then again, I think it may give us a little more information than the traditional flux takers fluorine index. So here's a map of particular organic carbon export production. The scale goes from 0 to 12 moles carbon per square per year, and the red colors are high export areas, and the centers of the diagram are low export areas. And we're interested in carbon export, as I said, because it's important. About half of the anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere is taken out of the ocean, and we want to know why this carbon sequestration from the atmosphere changes seasonally, and also how it will change in the future with increased CO2 in the atmosphere and climate change, also with the acidification and warming of the ocean. Here's a figure modified from my patent that shows a parallel between the carbon cycle and, in this case, the polonium cycle. Again, this figure was made with uranium and thorium in mind, but the idea is that we have dissolved carbon that's dissolved in the oceans and the atmosphere, and it gets fixed into particulate carbon through photosynthesis, and then that particulate carbon in the form of organic matter. In a parallel fashion, dissolved polonium mostly comes from the in-situ decay of dissolved lead. But it does get fixed into particular material by sorption and also penetration into the cytoplasm of cells, and then that particular polonium sinks. And it's that relationship between the particulate polonium and particulate carbon and the missing deficit of polonium in surface ocean that we use to calculate carbon export. Here's a cartoon of scavenging. If we assume the ocean is 2 layers, and we assume in this case red represents polonium-210 and blue represents lead-210, without any introduction or disturbance to the system, we assume after a few months that there would be secular equilibrium. But if we introduce particles, in this case phytoplankton, what happens is they both stick to the particles, but the polonium actually goes into the inside, into the cytoplasm of the cell, and so more polonium than lead, the polonium to lead ratio is greater than 1 on the particles, and they sink, leaving behind this deficit of polonium relative to lead in the surface ocean. So our data often looks something like this, where we have total lead in the black and total polonium in the white. And we can integrate this area between the two of them and call that the deficit, and then multiply it by a decay term and the ratio of carbon to polonium on particles that are sinking, and convert the deficit into an export value. Again, this is assuming steady state, but the particles we collect and the deficit sort of all formed at the same time and are lasting for over months. I'm running a little time. I originally thought I had more time. So just to summarize lab results, and I'm happy to talk about this with anyone later, we see very significant differences, particularly between polonium and lead and thorium behave similarly. And the primary difference happens here, that within the cells, polonium gets into the cytoplasm of the cells, whereas lead and thorium stick to the surface of the cells. And when these cells, cytoplasm cells, are eaten by zooplankton, polonium is assimilated by the grazers, but lead and thorium are not. And then when we did decomposition experiments, polonium is lost from organic matter at about the same rate as carbon is lost, whereas lead and barium are lost more slowly because the material desorbs and resorbs immediately. So I did a number of experiments. I'm going to fly through these results. But as I plunged into water with polonium and lead, the main result of these experiments is that different phytoplankton accumulate different amounts of polonium, and the only thing that could predict this difference was protein content. And so again, it's a question of whether or not polonium is actually creating protein, or specific amino acids, or some specific type of protein, cytoplasmic protein, cell wall protein. I think those are questions we can ask moving forward. And we fed that phytoplankton to grazers. And again, we found, in a figure that the conference already showed, we found that polonium was assimilated by grazers about 40% of their food ingestion. Similar to sulfur. Keep going. In contrast to lead and thorium, which were not assimilated at all. Just a couple more minutes. Here, it's interested in tracing carbon. Oh, it won't even let me. If we're interested in tracing carbon, we want to do something that behaves a little longer carbon. But that may actually be tracing sulfur. And just to confirm, we've used this method and it works. Verde did a review of the landscape, and polonium predicted carbon export. In fact, better in our cases than thorium before. And I did a study looking at time fractionation of particles and found that the carbon to polonium ratio stays very consistent through time fraction, confirming this idea that they are integrally involved with each other. The three open questions I want to present that I think we need to think about again are whether or not steady state work. The boy showed with thorium 234, they did a much better export prediction if you use non-steady state models. And this data is a little hard to see, but these squiggly lines are sediment trap data, and then these blocks are the water column estimates from thorium. So we can only give an estimate for the export over a month or 2 months or 3 months, but we know that the export changes on a weekly or daily basis. Another role which Mark brought up already is we now in oceanography we know that aggregation is very important for particle sinking, and for the sinking we partner together for aggregation of both transparent exopolymers or exopolymeric substances. And there was an interesting study in 2002 that almost every element in the periodic table gets in these exopolymeric substances except polonium. And so interesting to think we sort of what does that mean in using as a tracer, some more effective or less effective tracer. And then the last question that I raised a couple of times was Donnie showed, and I also found that thorium nutrition was associated with fresh phytoplankton material, but not necessarily with detritus or fecal blood or even bacterial biomass. So there's something in phytoplankton specifically about the polonium thing, and I think that's a great question moving forward. 5 to 10 years. What do we need to do? We need to get a lot more data. Geotraces is starting that, but one of the issues is getting all the way from the atmosphere to sediment. We need the full profile, not just the surface. We need to improve our model, distinguish between thorium and lead, and realize we're not parallel to thorium and uranium, and again, work on the construction of non-steady state models. And then the big question is, what exactly is the polonium tracing? I think that this relationship with sulfur is really an interesting avenue to explore. And people have done some lab experiments, particularly in animal tissues, to show that sulfur and polonium are related, but the mechanism is still unclear. Okay, sorry for going on. Thank you. If people have questions, maybe they can ask.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think the presentation of our audience was very much on the organizers. I wish to request that one to give a small memento to the
visual side, we have the space on the data, and we have also a lot of common energy. And we actually belongs to the part of the country, and this is called Meghalaya. In Meghalaya, The local villagers, the local populations, they believe for their daily use for heating their house, and they prepare charcoal. And this charcoal is prepared by burning the forest, and they cut the forest, they buried in this, and then they burn that and convert into the charcoal. And the area around the and also very famous for the pitcher plant, which also take the electricity from the air and they trap and from there they get electricity, not from the soil. And also these are the habits where they live with more people, famous in those markets. You can see village market where this is being sold. So in this, but because of the discovery of uranium mines, the water quality, which is one of the important parameters, because for many conjunctions they use local water resources, and this water because they percolate through the rich soil of uranium and thorium. So that's why radiation like uranium-238 polonium, they get dissolved in the water. Similarly for beta, uranium-nuclides, 214 also dissolved and ready to beta. So because of this here and there is surface volume of uranium, we wanted to know the physical consequence of making the water and what level is uranium-nuclides are present in the water. And this atomic mineral division in our country is responsible for uranium exploration, and they have discovered this large sandstone type of near surface uranium deposits for the gold mine, which is KB model, better known as this again as this is the very complex. So and this water is between the bedrock rocks and where the water is, and this water is used to our powder drinking purpose. And to get the samples from those areas was very difficult to access those areas. We have formed a team comprised of team of persons to go around the area and collect the samples. This is one of the things we have made here, and these are the you can see here these are the green blocks, particularly which has been going to be explored for the mine, and this surface at every 2 kilometers. And within this 2 kilometer radius, we have all the water bodies. We have which used by this village, which are the villages around that area used for the drinking purpose. Populations, they believe for their daily use for heating their house, and they prepare charcoal. And this charcoal is prepared by the forest, and they cut the forest, they buried in this and then they burn that and convert into the charcoal. They burn the area around the and also very famous for the pitcher plant, which also take electricity from the air and they trap and they from there they get electricity, not from the soil. And also these are the habits where they really small people famous in those markets. You can see village market where this is being sold. So in this, but because of the discovery of uranium mines, the water quality, which is one of the water quality parameters, because for many conditions they use local water resources, and this water percolate through the rich soil of uranium and thorium. So that's why radioactive like uranium-238 they get dissolved in the water. Similarly for beta, uranium-nuclides, 214 dissolved and beta. So because of this here and there is surface volume of uranium, we wanted to know the physical consequences and what level is radionuclides are present in the water. And this atomic mineral division in our country is responsible for uranium exploration, and they have discovered this large sandstone type of near surface uranium deposits for the gold mining, which is KB model, better known as this again as this the compressed. So, and this water is between the bed of rocks and where the water is in there. And this water is used to our water drinking purpose. And to get the samples from those areas, it was very difficult to assess those areas. We have formed a team comprised a team of persons to go around the area and collect the samples. This is one of the things we have made here, and these are the, you can see that these are the living rocks, particularly which has been going to explore for 29. And this surface at the 3 kilometers. And within this 10 kilometer radius, we have all the water bodies. We have taken the samples we use by this village, the villages around that area used for the drinking purpose. Some of the areas which we went there and collected the sample is shown here. This is Clandioline. Again, you can see the water accumulated here, and this is the main water. This is mountain there, and these are the things which is going through the deep forest, rainforest of that area. Again, you can see the water being collected from those red rocks. This is footprints, water is on the top of the union rocks, and it is going through that. This is only long area, and this is the Roman area. Again, you can see here the water which is calculated. This is one of the readily calculated in the soil collections. These are the survey meters where we typically use to get the radiation mapping of the area, and this is where the water samples have been analyzed for the parameters. These are the locations where we have GPS points of all these locations where we have covered, and we have recorded for the purpose of going in next season and collecting from the samples. So here you can see this is what we collected 20 liters. Our collections, proper marking has been done. And after marking, because the transport is not available to the sample industry, so we have to take the helps, and these people are bringing the water from the deep bedrock to near the nearest road to what sample can be loaded on the deep or wagon, and then we are bringing it to lab, and based on the resistance having added, research has been added, then we process the sample and the taking, and then alpha counting has been done, and from there we get the the upper system which we have used was made of 86 meter plants and single cell chamber series, and this alpha radiation of 90 kV, and the pressure recovery between 90 to 95% in the sample we have observed. So in this study, the first thing in our country, the electricity of the water is based on the gross alpha activity. When we have done the gross alpha activity, the two locations at Kosingai and also we have seen that we have crossed the material range of 100.